Hi, my name is Brant Phillips with Houston Capital Home Buyers. I want to talk to you about what should you do once you receive an offer on your house, and hopefully give you some things to think about and help you to avoid some of the mistakes that I've made, to be quite honest, when I've sold some properties in the past. So there's basically three things that we want to look for: the price, the terms, and the buyer. And I'll break down each of those real quickly. So price. So first off, like, is it an acceptable price? So, pretty self-explanatory here. You can either accept the offer that they've given you and move forward, or you can negotiate or just not accept that offer at all if they don't want to negotiate. But just because you receive an acceptable price, I want you to also look at some additional things to factor in what is your true net dollar amount coming to your bottom line. So first and foremost, are the buyers offering to pay any closing costs? So typically in a standard real estate transaction, buyer and seller will pay for some of the closing costs, and with the exception of if it's an investor offer, a lot of investors will offer to pay all closing costs. But in a traditional transaction, those costs are going to be split in certain different percentages. For instance, the owner's title policy, which is probably the third largest closing cost for a seller, that can be negotiated. Other seller, closing costs can be negotiated for the seller and the buyer as well, including escrow fees, home warranties, HOA transfer fees, other recording and insurance fees. I'll get into those in just a minute, or some of those. Are the buyers offering to pay for a new survey, or will they accept an existing survey? So you may have an existing survey on your home that may be, 2 to 10 years old or longer. So if the title company will accept it, the question is if the buyer will accept it. If the buyer will accept it, then great. Then that means that it's not an expense for you and it's not an expense for them. But if the buyer is requesting a new survey, who's going to pay that survey? Surveys, depending on the amount of the land and which area that you live in, could be anywhere from $500 to $1,000 or more for that matter. So find out who's going to pay for that survey. And are the buyers paying for the survey coverage? So survey coverage is essentially an additional coverage to the title insurance policy and protects the buyer against any errors with the survey. So generally, if the buyer's relying on an existing survey provided by you, the seller, they're likely going to ask for that coverage in the policy, which makes sense. And that may be something that they ask you to pay for because you're saving money on the survey. So that, to me, is very, very reasonable, and that's pretty standard. So that's something you want to look at. You also want to look at if they are requesting a home warranty or not. I live in the state of Texas, and it's pretty typical that they request it, and usually, not always, the seller is responsible for paying the cost of the buyer's home warranty. But there's exceptions to every rule. Sometimes they don't request a home warranty, or sometimes, they're just going to pay for it themselves. If it is in a hot market, if you're selling a property in a hot market, or there's multiple offers for your property. So that's something you want to take a look at. So I mentioned we're going to look at three things, right? Price, terms, and buyer. So let's look at some of the terms. What are we looking at here? The closing date. How soon can they close? Is that date aligned with your timeline of when you need to move out, when your next home is going to be ready, when your job transfer is taking place? Well, maybe just how long you kind of need to get things in order. How flexible is the buyer on that timing? Is the buyer willing to offer a lease back on the property? So a lease back is basically, we do these a lot when we buy houses where, let's say, for example, we're closing in the property in 10 days. A lot of times when we send an offer saying, hey, we're going to close in 10 days, our sellers are like, whoa, slow down. That's way too quick. We're not going to be ready by then. And we say, we understand, but what we do is offer a lease back for those who want it. And we say, we'll purchase your property, in 5 to 10 days. And that way that you can sell the property, you can receive your proceeds at closing, but you don't have to move out of the house just yet. We may extend a lease back for, a week, a month, 2 months. I think we've even done a 3 to 6 month lease back before, where it just gives the seller time to kind of get things in order, get moved, find another property, all those types of things. And you may also, it's very important, look at when the offer expires. So in a seller's market that we're currently in at the time of this recording, buyers are really having to fight to get an offer accepted. So they will go out with their agent, look at multiple properties, go online and send a lot of offers that may have a very short expiration date. So you want to look at that. And lastly, let's look at the buyer. How qualified is the buyer? How likely are they to close? Is it a cash buyer? Just because they say they are a cash buyer, have they provided proof of funds? How you really want to know how financially secure that buyer is, so that you don't make the mistake that I've made of moving forward on a deal without really qualifying the buyer and losing that deal because they weren't able to get financing. If it is a cash buyer, are they going to actually purchase your property or just wholesale it, or what is it called, assigning it to another, hopefully, buyer that's able to close? This is a very important issue that happens a lot in our industry. So look at the name of the buyer and see if they include some verbiage that may say something like "and" or "signs." This is usually a telltale sign that they're going to wholesale your property. So it is not illegal in most states. It is something that is being legislated as we speak in a lot of states across the country to not allow this transaction to happen any longer. But at the time of this recording in the state of Texas, for example, it's not illegal, but what you want to make sure is making sure that you're not left hung out to dry at the day of closing because they're not able to close. So you really want to look at that buyer, screen them thoroughly. How much of a down payment are they putting down if they're using traditional financing? How are they submitting their offer with a pre-approval letter? What's the amount of their earnest money deposit? Have they added any contingencies, meaning their offer is contingent upon selling of another property, like their existing primary residence? If so, I will tell you, we will almost always never accept that contingency. It's very risky, with the exception of a home sale contingency where that property is already under contract to be sold and has passed the option period. We may consider at that point in time. Is there a financing contingency, meaning they can back out if they can't get financing, which is pretty standard. That's something you have to just kind of deal with. So that's why you want to really look hard at the pre-approval letter. We've even called their mortgage brokers, just to kind of get some feedback to see how confident they really feel about them closing. And an appraisal contingency, meaning if the home doesn't meet a appraised value of what you're under contract to sell it for, are they looking for you to come out of pocket and reduce your price, or is that something that they're going to be willing to do? You can also look at things like an inspection contingency, how much is their option fee, and things like that. So, just because you receive an offer, it doesn't mean that the house is sold yet. So I hope this video has been helpful on giving you some things to consider and things that you should look at analyzing and paying attention to when you receive an offer to sell your home.